So everything was very wonderful in Rishikesh, and Prabhupada was very restful, and we were having a wonderful time. And then all of a sudden one day there was this huge storm, and it looked so ominous. And it was not only heavy rain, but there was a storm, and the storm made some electric poles topple over at some place, and electric supply got disrupted, and it became very cold also, cold, rainy, and wind, and it was very kind of eerie, like ominous. And those days I used to attend Srila Prabhupada from 12 to 2, and it was around 1 o'clock. Prabhupada just called me, and he told me that the time has come for me to die, and I want to die in Vrindavan. So make arrangements to take me to Vrindavan. And it was such a shock, as if it was a bolt from the blue. So that night only we packed everything up, and we decided to leave the next morning.
Radha Krishna Padaravinda Bhajananandina Matvalikam Vande Rupa Sanatana Raghujugam Sridiva Gopalakam Vande Rupa Sanatana Raghujugam Sridiva Gopalakam.
When Prabhupada arrived, the devotees were so happy. And when Prabhupada went to his room, all the devotees came in, and there Prabhupada broke the news why he came. And I remember, in a flash of a moment, their ecstasy was transformed into agony. Devotees started to cry, and understanding their feelings, Srila Prabhupada then started to console the devotees by explaining about the futility of our material existence. He quoted the verse, Dehi nosmin jatha dehi. It's just a matter of transmigrating from one body to another. And Prabhupada called me when all the devotees left, and he told me, from now on, don't cook for me. Don't force me to eat anything. So what's the use of eating when there is no appetite? And I felt that Prabhupada is actually stopping to eat and drink like Parikshit Maharaj, preparing to leave his body.
Our Gurukula wasn't finished at that time, and we had rooms in the guest house on the 3rd floor, top floor. And I would go onto the roof of the guest house, and you could overlook onto the roof of Srila Prabhupada's house. And in the evening they would set up a mosquito net for him and a lamp on his desk, and you could hear Prabhupada push the button click of his dictaphone and then translate. And he would do that night after night, but who knows how late Srila Prabhupada would stay up translating, even in his poor health. So it was very assuring to hear Srila Prabhupada in the still of Vrindavan in the night, where you would hear a bell from some ashram ringing the time out, or you'd hear a peacock call. But in the stillness of the night, you would hear Srila Prabhupada translating his Bhagavatam for us and for the world.
I went to Vrindavan and I was given the service of being Prabhupada's secretary, and I got this room that overlooked Prabhupada's roof. I had a bird's eye view from my little office. It was great. And I remember looking out one time, there was a huge wind blowing. They call it the loo, that bad wind. It's really unhealthy, and everybody goes indoors and buttons up their shutters. And Prabhupada just stayed outside translating, and he kept trying the mic and putting it down and waiting for the wind to go down a bit, but he just had his chatter around him and he didn't go, and he just kept on translating.
The most traumatic thing I remember of that period is when Srila Prabhupada left for London. He left at midnight. So all the devotees stayed up to say, well, goodbye to Prabhupada, because he was going off to the West to preach. And as the car pulled off, it suddenly stopped. And it stopped in such a position that I was looking down at Srila Prabhupada, and Prabhupada was looking up at me. And he was on at least one guest house mattress had been placed in the back of the ambassador car, and he was lying on it. And I'll never forget looking down at Prabhupada and Prabhupada looking at me, because obviously his body was flesh and bones, but there he was going off to London to preach. And I was so shocked, because he didn't look like he should be going anywhere, but still his determination to preach and to please his devotees was far bigger than his desire to look after his own body. And that picture of Prabhupada has stayed in my mind all these years. Prabhupada's determination.
I remember standing in the alleyway there, watching Prabhupada drive away, and when Prabhupada's lights were no longer seen, I was reflecting about how Srila Prabhupada's life's energy was simply utilized for the purpose of helping others, benefiting others. It was not ever selfishly used, but it was selflessly used. And this was Srila Prabhupada's glory.
Srila Prabhupada was very happy to be here at this point in London, because India had become most unpleasant. Just prior to leaving, the riot had occurred in Mayapur, where Bhavananda had been arrested and other devotees had been arrested, and Srila Prabhupada understood that they were actually looking for him, that they wanted to arrest him. And he was feeling very disgusted with India. He said, "What have I done?" He said, "All they've done is harass me." He came into London, he said, "Here everyone is so nice." He said, "Everyone has always been so helpful to me." So we came into the manor, into his rooms, and I remember sitting with him that day or the next day in the drawing room, and he was just appreciating how nice things were in the West. He said, "Everything in your Western countries is so nicely done." He said, "People are also so nice. Simply if they wouldn't eat the cow." He said, "Isn't there any other kind of meat they can eat besides the cow?"
I was traveling. I intended to come to Europe to do street clowning with my girlfriend. In New York City, we met a Sankirtan devotee who gave us a book and a record, Radha Krishna album. And when we heard this music, I remember thinking that there's nothing I want to do besides find out what this means and meet the people who are singing this music. So we went to England. That was in March of '77. So it was only 4 months later that the devotee said, "Srila Prabhupada is coming." And we all considered it just a wonderful miracle that somehow or other we were actually going to be able to meet him. Many of the older devotees were pained to see him in that condition, but to me it was the first time I saw him, and he just was so incredibly attractive. He was glowing like the sun, just so beautiful, like the ripened fruit of tapasya. I'd never experienced anyone who was exuding so much love. I just was astonished. I had an interesting experience that while he was giving this first lecture, I was sitting, back in a corner where I could see him, but so many devotees around. But I had the strange feeling that while Prabhupada was speaking, he was looking directly at me and speaking to me. It was as if he had sat down in front of me and said, "My dear child, this is why you've been suffering in the material world. and now it's time for you to go back home, back to Krishna. Come with me, and I'll take you home. I felt pretty silly due to my big false ego, thinking that I had received special attention. So after the lecture, when I went out into the hallway, I overheard some devotees speaking that, oh, I had this strange experience that Prabhupada was looking straight at me and speaking directly to me. And then I heard another group of people speaking, and at least 3 or 4 different groups of devotees mentioned like this. I was just kind of stunned. What kind of person is this? And it was also interesting, while I was in this lecture, I had a unique feeling that Prabhupada was looking straight into my soul, that he was looking at my essential self, not at the person who I had previously thought I was, but looking through all the layers of my conditioning to see my true self, that I was an eternal, spiritual, living entity, a servant of Krishna, and that he would hold this realization of me so strongly. It felt as if that could bring me out of all those layers of conditioning to the point where I can also realize who I am. So, because I was a latecomer, and in one way felt unfortunate that I was only able to see Prabhupada in his very last days, in another way I felt like I received wonderful benediction.